Welcome to Surviving to Thriving, the podcast for women ready to reclaim their energy, clarity, and life. I'm Dr. Rachel Yeager, and I know what it's like to feel exhausted, overwhelmed, and stuck. Here, we go beyond quick fixes to explore the science and soul of healing, covering stress resilience, brain reset, hormone balance, nervous system support, and connecting with your intuition. If you're ready to stop surviving and start thriving, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome. Today, I want to share with you an episode from Mind Body Besties. It's a podcast that my therapist friend Katie and I have started together. So far, we have 7 episodes out, and I want to share the episode where we talk about ADHD. So we dive into a therapist's perspective on ADHD and different coping mechanisms and things that can help. And we talk about the actual biological, physiological, brain and cellular root causes that can be happening behind ADHD. We talk about what the genetics can influence. So for example, your genetics can set you up to have different levels of brain chemicals that are associated with ADHD. And we talk about what you can actually do, given that information, to help support your body and help support rebalancing your brain chemicals so you can have better focus and just feel more motivated in general. So this is helpful even if you feel like you just have some ADHD tendencies or some ADHD type symptoms, even if you haven't been diagnosed with ADHD. This also could be helpful if you just know someone who has ADHD. So without further ado, I'm going to plug in that episode here, and you can always go over and follow us at Mind Body Besties to be able to listen to the rest of that podcast as well.
Welcome to Mind Body Besties, your weekly reset with real talk, a little laughter, and the kind of honest conversations you'd have with your closest friend. I'm Katie, a therapist.
And I'm Rachel, a naturopathic doctor. We're here to share the personal stories, struggles, and wins that have shaped our own health and happiness. This isn't a lecture, it's a safe space to slow down, connect, and feel a little more human again. So grab your coffee, get cozy, and let's reset together.
Welcome to another episode of Mind Body Besties. Today we are going to be talking all about ADHD.
ADHD has gotten so popular lately, especially talking about it on social media. So we're going to cover it, and we're going to talk about the ADHD that you get in childhood versus later in life. We're going to talk about the overlap between ADHD and anxiety, and also what you can do to help your ADHD symptoms from a holistic perspective.
So Rachel and I both work with ADHD just in very different ways and in very different capacities. Obviously, as a therapist, I see a lot of people that have been diagnosed with ADHD in the past or think that they might have it. So I was just going to start out with what ADHD is, according to the DSM at least, and how we view it in the mental health space.
Let's do it.
Okay. So there are 3 types of ADHD. Number 1 is predominantly inattentive. And when we see someone with predominantly inattentive type, they typically have trouble paying attention for long periods of time. They have trouble with attention to detail. They might fail to finish schoolwork or job duties or chores. They have trouble organizing tasks and activities. And then they're that person that is easily forgetful, easily distracted. You can derail whatever they're doing really easily. Number 2 is predominantly hyperactive and impulsive. So these are the people that I think we normally think of. They're hyperactive, they fidget, especially in kids. They'll leave their seat when they're supposed to be seated somewhere, or be climbing on things when it's an inappropriate place to be doing that. They just can't sit still. Adults might be on the go all the time or look really productive, like they're just going, but they can't stop and they're not actually being productive. They might also talk a lot. They might interrupt and they have trouble waiting their turn. So standing in line is like worst case scenario for someone with this type of ADHD. And then number 3 is the combined type, which is the most common that we see. So people have aspects of both types.
You know, I hate waiting in line, and there are times in my life when I had trouble focusing, and I definitely have wondered if I had ADHD. So I think this will be great to talk about do you just have ADHD type symptoms or do you actually have ADHD?
And so a lot of these symptoms will overlap with a diagnosis like anxiety or even depression or PTSD. And what you have to pay attention to is number one, when you go through this list of symptoms, especially in the DSM when we diagnose, it can't just be one or two. I think the criteria is 5 or 6 out of the 7 or 8 from each category. So you have to meet most of them, like more than 75%. And another thing that really helps to avoid misdiagnosis in adults is that the onset of these symptoms have to happen before age 12. If you had none of these before age 12, you don't have ADHD. Now, I'm not saying that you're not experiencing ADHD-like symptoms because, yeah, you probably are, but it's not because you were just born with ADHD.
Yeah. And I think that's a great segue to talk about from the holistic naturopathic lens. This isn't an area that's commonly explored by naturopathic doctors, but because I have my focus on mental health, I've really dived into this. And a lot of this is also just my observation. This is not something that's been researched. So I have really noticed that there's different types of ADHD. One of the types that I see in my own little personal categorization is, like you said, Katie, they've had it since they were a kid. Usually they say, like, when I was 5, my parents got a call and we had to go talk to people when I was 5. And so with that, Dr. Amen, the brain doctor, has done a lot of research. And usually if it shows up really young, we're actually seeing blood flow changes and changes in different size of the regions of our brain, even from a young age.
I'm obsessed with Dr. Amen.
He's
by the
so
way.
cool.
He is, and we can talk about his SPECT scans. I don't know how much you know about that, but that's something you can do. So
let's talk about it for a second, because NeuroQuant is a new one, but the SPECT is super cool, and they basically do really similar things. So,
okay, yeah. So if someone did actually have ADHD, they were born with it, and they got their brain scanned, what would that look like?
Yeah, they would have less blood flow to the prefrontal cortex and other regions. And then also sometimes there's actually smaller size brains, which doesn't mean it sounds so negative and it sounds awful. But for example, I remember seeing in the news recently that they just found a guy who was missing the majority of his brain and was leading a fully functional life. So our brains are incredible. We can function off of, we only use like 10% of our brain. It's not as severe as it sounds.
I did also see, so I specialize in OCD. People with OCD have an issue with their amygdala, but there was I saw it on social media from like a reputable source, but someone with OCD got a SPECT scan and the doctor was like, oh my God, you have the biggest amygdala I have ever seen.
Yeah.
And so knowing things like that, now I'm like, oh, no wonder. And also, what are you going to do about that?
That's a huge ingrained trauma response from a physiological level.
Yeah. So it's just all fascinating to me that this can come from so many different places.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have that first, these unofficial categories where we're probably having different blood flow, different brain shape, and we're having symptoms show up since we're really little. Then number 2, what I see a lot is people who have this genetic ADHD type picture. They probably wouldn't have actual changes show up on a SPECT scan, or at least the changes wouldn't be inherently the root cause. The changes would be the result of the genetic low neurotransmitters. And some might be high, but some are going to be low. And PEA, dopamine, glutamate, and adrenaline are governing those ADHD type symptoms. And so my hunch is that this mixed type, the combination, combined ADHD, has some high and some low. And then the inattentive is all low. And the hyperactive is all high, pretty much, if we were to generalize.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And let's talk about neurotransmitters in a minute, because that is huge for ADHD. So that's that second category that I see. And then the third category, which I actually think is the most common in the US, and people are getting diagnosed with ADHD that are in this category that I would argue are missing their true root cause. It's inflammation-induced. So they're having mold exposure, or they're eating something that they're having a huge inflammatory reaction to, or they're celiac and they don't know it, or they have an undiagnosed autoimmune condition, or it's not in remission. So they're having a ton of body inflammation. Your brain is just an organ in your body. Your brain gets inflamed just the way your gut would get inflamed. And then you end up with basically ADHD symptoms.
Yeah. And I have absolutely had clients that have, for not mental health reasons, but for other reasons, cut out like gluten or dairy or some other thing that they didn't know that they were allergic to. And when they did cut that out, their mental health symptoms also just happened to go away.
I believe it. I see this all the time.
And they walk in and they're like, I think I'm a lot better. And I'm like, okay, great. And also, why is this not something that people know? Why aren't we taught this? I think, obviously, I have to stay in my lane with mental health when I work with people. But why aren't we taught, oh, if you see this, you might want to send them to a naturopathic doctor or a chiropractor or a nutritionist or someone else, but we're not taught about any overlap with anything else, really.
And that's a really good point. And I think that's a missed opportunity, because how many other providers spend an hour with their patients that are integrated so much into the conventional system like therapists are?
Yeah. And you do get to know, because you spend so much time with them, about lots of other things in their life, that they're coming in for anxiety, but I also know that their dad's name is this and he plays golf every Saturday, or they've been having all these stomach issues and it's really bumming them out. Okay, why? Yeah. We do get to spend a lot of time with our clients.
Definitely. Yeah. So with these kind of 3 unofficial categories, I'm usually asking people questions to figure out which one are we most likely in. And then based on that, there's going to be different root causes. The one where it's more of you're born with it, your brain is just operating differently, we can still do so much for that, because we can influence blood flow with herbs. Again, like different size of your brain regions definitely is going to impact you, but it's not, a sentence that's concrete. You can change that. And even with the inflammatory type, people will get their brain scanned, and then they'll, heal, they'll change their diet. Like you said, they'll do all these things that lower their inflammation. They go get it rescanned. Not only is their blood flow better, but their brain actually, the regions corrected their size deficiency.
Oh, wow.
They regrew. Our brains are so cool.
So in terms of supplements, herbs, diet, what are some things that you might recommend for people?
Yeah, there's a couple supplements off the bat that I think are really helpful. And one of my favorite go-to ones, if we're not going to do testing, and I can put it below if anyone's curious, so don't worry about my spelling it, but it's called NuAdapt, N-U-Adapt. And that one is boosting blood flow, and it's helping modulate our immune system, so it helps with brain inflammation. And it's a nootropic, so it's stimulating our cognition, stimulating our focus, our motivation, and it gives us energy. And it also works on our cortisol stress axis, because that contributes to ADHD as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but cortisol is a huge missed part. So that one is the one I do if someone doesn't want to test. If someone wants to test, then neurotransmitter testing, which I love to do, lets us know, is your serotonin high? Is your dopamine low?
How do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you test
this thing ever? It is the most underutilized thing. It's a urine test.
Okay.
It's easy. It's at home. You collect 4 times of the day. A good test will have you collect 4 times of the day so that you can average it together, because you're going to have natural fluctuations in a day. It's so accurate that if we are only targeting certain things in there and then we retest that person again a few months later or even years later, it's the exact same within 3 points.
Wow.
If it was something that we didn't touch.
That's crazy.
It's so accurate.
Just pee in a cup and you know about your neurotransmitters.
Yes. And so with the neurotransmitters, I see all the time low dopamine. I see things like high PEA causing panic attacks. And once we fix that, people haven't had another single panic attack. And then we're having things like, glutamate imbalance, because your glutamate drops when you're exposed to inflammation. So that one's a huge sign of, is this an inflammatory type ADHD picture? And actually, maybe they actually wouldn't even meet the criteria for the diagnosis after we cleared the inflammation. And then there's a bunch of other things. We have the break, which is our calming, relaxing neurotransmitters that we always need pressed down. We always want the break pressed down. And then we have our excitatory neurotransmitters that are pressed down. And we should talk about medications, because what I see, everyone's taking these meds that press on the gas, but they're not pressing on the brake. So we can press on the brake with supplements. People don't have to come off their meds. But do you see medications helping people? How do you see people doing with choosing meds versus therapy versus other things?
It's kind of 50-50. So there are a lot of people that don't want to do therapy at all because they feel like it hasn't worked, and maybe it didn't. They just want meds. And then I do see a handful of clients that want to do both. Like 90% of the time, people are on Adderall. For people that don't want to take stimulants, there is Strattera, but people tend to have not great side effects on that. Like my husband has ADHD. I now want him to go pee in a cup. And he tried Strattera and had every negative side effect possible. But people on Adderall, which is what I mostly see, it's like they take it, it works, but they don't like how they feel taking it. They feel like a zombie and like they've lost their personality. Or people take it and maybe they don't really have ADHD, and then it makes them hyperactive and jittery, and so they don't really like it. So I think the medication really does help, and I think some people really couldn't function without it. But I think if they were doing these more holistic things, they might not need it. But if you're not open to that, then I think it really helps. You just might not like how you feel. And also, I don't prescribe meds. I am not a doctor, but I have noticed that the people that do really well with it only take it when they need it. So they don't take it on the weekend. They don't take it if they have the day off from work. They only take it when they really need to get something done. And that seems to work better for them.
They have shown that drug holidays from stimulants can be really good for tolerating a medication well. Fun fact, I was prescribed Adderall in college when I was having chronic fatigue and trouble focusing, and turns out it was inflammation and I didn't know it. So I would be in that category of people who just had inflammation. But I had to stop taking it after about a week because I started almost getting psychosis.
Oh my God.
I felt like I was going crazy because I didn't need it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't need my dopamine to be any higher. I didn't need that.
Yeah, you don't, that's why people that don't need it take it for fun. And then they like go clean their entire house and stay up all night and, pass a test that they needed to pass. Because when you don't need it, it does the opposite.
And then you crash because your dopamine is coming down from a high level that it was never supposed to be at. Versus if you're low dopamine, true ADHD, you're just being pushed up to a normal level.
Yeah. So then you get like a Adderall hangover.
Yeah.
For more than one day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not a good thing to do.
Yeah. If only people knew that instead of taking Adderall for their tests, they could take adaptogens and other really cool supplements that let your brain modulate its brain chemical levels itself so that you're not pushing this kind of hyper levels and then having a crash.
Yeah.
What do you think about CBT, and what are the best types of therapy that you've seen for ADHD?
Yeah. So typically, the gold standard for ADHD treatment is ADHD-focused CBT. And I'm going to make some therapists mad out there, but I don't think CBT is particularly therapeutic. It's a lot more like coaching to me. And I'm not saying that's bad necessarily, but if someone's coming to you because they are having trouble focusing, they can't get their shit together, for lack of better words, and you use CBT, you're going to be doing psychoeducation, which is great. They need to understand what ADHD is and how it's impacting them. You're going to be doing time management with them, which that's not particularly therapeutic. It's okay. Do you need to set alarms? Do you need a calendar? Do you need to time block? Do you need to make a list of priorities? What do you need to do? They're also going to focus on organizational skills. So how do you get stuff organized? Do you have a to-do list? Do you break down tasks into smaller parts? Do you need to also just minimize clutter in your workspace so you can focus? And then part of it is going to be emotion regulation, which is helping manage overwhelm or anger, or if you feel really bad about yourself because you have ADHD and you feel like you can't get anything done. So there is some mild therapeutic stuff, but it's very much teaching you how to cope with your symptoms. It's not going to fix your symptoms from a root cause approach. But all of that said, if you are one of those people that truly has ADHD, you were born with it, this has been going on since you were a little kid, I think CBT is going to be helpful throughout your life, because every time there's a big transition, a new job, you go to college,
You need to cope.
yeah, you have kids, you're going to have to cope, and that's going to look differently in each phase of life. So from that perspective, I think it can be really helpful. If I were going to work with someone with ADHD, yeah, I would do some of those things because you just have to. But I would also try to focus on like mindfulness-based therapies and teaching them to regulate their nervous system as best as they can. Because when you do get frustrated or you're upregulated because you're so distracted by everything, you're going to need some way to calm down and come back to earth. And so I like mindfulness-based things. I also like somatic-based therapies, which is really focusing on where something is stuck in your body or where you're feeling something in your body and how to work through that. We use that with trauma a lot. So I like the more mindfulness-based approaches, but I am probably an outlier on that.
That makes sense to me. In my brain, I picture it like if you have the dopamine levels that you need and the other gas neurotransmitter levels that you need to not have these ADHD symptoms, and you're able to focus, it's like you have enough gas in the tank to go 60 miles an hour. And when you're going that fast, you can only look right ahead of you on the road, and you're very focused ahead of you on the road. And if your gas tank is barely full and you have to cruise at 5 miles an hour, then you can look at everything around you while you drive. Yeah. And so I would think that mindfulness-based practices would help you focus on just one thing instead of taking in all of the stimuli that your brain has to process.
Yeah. And, with true ADHD, there's a lot of anxiety that comes with that because you aren't getting things done. So maybe your assignment is late, a project at work didn't happen. You promised your significant other you would mow the lawn or reorganize something in the pantry, and you just can't do it. You can't seem to get there. And so there's anxiety with that. That might also cause depression because of low self-esteem. You feel bad about yourself. You're not motivated. So there's like a whole slew of other symptoms that come with that. But I also think when you go to a therapist, it's really important to look at what came first. Have you had these ADHD symptoms since before you were 12 and they've been pretty consistent? Or are you an adult that hasn't experienced this before and you're so anxious that you can't concentrate anymore? Or you've experienced a really traumatic event, and because you're in this heightened state of fight or flight, you can't focus because of that, and you get distracted and can't get things done. So I think it's really important to look at which one came first, because PTSD, anxiety, and ADHD, like separated on their own, are very different.
I love that. With the fight or flight, I think we forget that, yes, it's a brain state, but it actually changes our cellular biochemistry. So we have different blood flow happening. So we're going to have different blood flow to areas of our brain with that. And then with the anxiety part, the same neurotransmitters that we find being off in ADHD. So if you have really low dopamine, that's going to cause you anxiety. And I've also seen it cause behaviors like skin picking and OCD tendencies. We see that with low dopamine.
Yes.
But yeah, it seems like this is an area where there's just so much overlap. And that's why we love holistic health, because we can actually find the root cause and Doesn't matter as much what your official diagnosis is. It's helpful to navigate the conventional system with that. But from a root cause perspective, if we're going to look at blood flow and we're going to look at neurotransmitters and we're going to look at mindfulness, I feel like it doesn't matter as much as long as we're all being trauma informed anyway.
Yeah. And I think in the mental health space, unless you are a psychiatrist or a psychologist, really your practice is testing. All of us other mental health professionals that are like counselors or social workers, I think we forget that there are lots of assessments available to us. And just because someone walks in your door and says, I have ADHD, I'm not saying don't believe them, maybe they do, but verify that. Give them one of the many assessments you can give. And if that doesn't match up, there's a bunch of other assessments, and you really need to find what the diagnosis is, or maybe they don't fit any one diagnosis and they just have all these clusters of symptoms. And just like you can do testing, I think mental health professionals need to remember they can also do, we don't call it testing, we can do assessments, figure this stuff out. Because if we're just guessing, how long is it going to take to figure it out?
Might as well be as precise as we can be. I love that. And I similarly will have people come to me that say, I have non-autoimmune hypothyroidism. And then we look at their labs and it's the opposite. Or, so it's not necessarily that they're coming in and saying it wrong. It's just maybe your doctor didn't tell you. And maybe they didn't look, or maybe it wasn't explained well. So I think it's always good to just do a full assessment and see what is the whole picture, what is the bird's eye view. Yes, you were told this from a conventional perspective, but are we missing anything else, any other part of your picture?
Yeah. So what do you say to someone who is an adult and they're having all these ADHD symptoms for the first time, and they have tried therapy and they want to dig deeper? Who should they go see, and maybe what tests should they ask for? Ideally, the practitioner would know, but if they have to ask because they have to go more
because they're advocating,
what would you have them ask for?
I think we'd want to investigate inflammation and we'd want to investigate brain health. So I think I'm biased because naturopathic doctor, so I love naturopathic doctors, but someone who has the medical training to be able to know what labs to look for to check your inflammation markers, and someone who knows about CIRS, which is the chronic inflammatory response in the body, which we did not learn even in naturopathic medical school. So that's a whole different subset where you dive really deep into the root cause of inflammation. And I like that because we're going to address inflammation differently based on what the root cause of a person's inflammation is.
Yeah.
So if the naturopathic doctor or whoever it is familiar with the CIRS protocol, then they're going to know all the things to look for. So that would help remove the actual inflammatory trigger, because removing the exposure is always going to be the most helpful. And then there's no need to let your body try to recover its own neurotransmitters on its own for 3 years. There's no need to suffer. Like, we can just help bump them back. So doing the neurotransmitter and cortisol testing would be the other half, I would think. The brain is just, I say this all the time, but it's the CEO of our whole body. So if they got in an inflammation loop from something that was out of their control, like mold, they're actually going to stay in that inflammation loop, possibly even after they're not even exposed to mold anymore, if they don't reset their brain so they can switch that flip off and their cells can go back to normal.
Gotcha.
Get out of survival mode.
Anything else you want to add? Did we miss anything?
I don't think so. I think just because we work with so many women, I do think a lot of women are less diagnosed, which I know you see.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that too.
Yeah. And just the fact that women, can mask it a little bit differently. And I think you said you noticed, even in kids, it's been observational. There's been observational differences.
Yeah. So with kids, boys tend to be more hyperactive, for one, louder, maybe more aggressive. They look like they have more behavioral issues. And that's just because they're kids and they don't know how to express feelings or frustration yet. And girls tend to be better at masking. They're less likely to go hit another kid because they're frustrated And so it's not seen as much. They silently are frustrated that they can't focus on things. So it does get missed. And then in adults, it's the same thing. I think men can come across as more, not aggressive, but it's more obvious. Maybe they interrupt more, they talk over people more. And women, again, are better at masking because of how society teaches women to act.
Yeah.
And they're, again, more silently suffering with this stuff. So we just don't know that they have that going on.
That would track from everything I've seen. That makes sense.
Yeah. And there's lots of research on this. If you want to Google that and find some research, you definitely can. But just anecdotally, that's what I've seen.
Yeah. I think inflammation is always going to be a thing that comes up with ADHD. And I think we covered the neurotransmitters. We covered the therapy types.
I think this is where every episode ends, is brain health, inflammation. And yes, there are two different approaches to go at this. Sometimes it's going to be more mental health related, sometimes more physical health.
But they're so connected.
But you should probably just look at both.
You should probably just do both. Yeah. You should probably just go see Katie and myself and live your best life.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I think that's all we've got.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another weekly reset. If you loved hanging out with us today, subscribe so you never miss an episode, and share this with a friend who could use a little calm and connection too. This show is for education and inspiration, not medical advice. To learn more or connect with us, check out the show notes below. Until next time, take care of your mind, your body, and your heart. All right, that was Mind Body Besties, my podcast with Katie. If you want to check us out, we're called Mind Body Besties. You can listen on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. And definitely leave us a rating or a review so you can let us know if you're liking what we're talking about. And we are open to different topics, so you can also follow us on social media and give us suggestions for what you'd like to hear about. Thank you for tuning in to Surviving to Thriving. If you enjoyed today's episode, share it with a friend and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. This show is for education and inspiration, not medical advice. For tools and next steps to restore your health, energy, and peace of mind, visit my website or connect with me online. The links are in the show notes. Until next time, keep believing. Thriving is possible for you.